Okay, so tonight we're diving into something a little different, a little unexpected. Um,
Different indeed.
it might not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think about, underground markets or criminal activity.
No, it's definitely not what you'd expect. It's not drugs or weapons or anything like that.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But I got to say, the information that we've uncovered is, well, it's pretty fascinating. And honestly, it's a little unsettling too.
Yeah, it is unsettling when you start to peel back the layers and see how organized and frankly brazen this whole operation is.
Right, so we're talking about stolen trees specifically in Pretoria.
Stolen trees in Pretoria, exactly, and not just any trees. We're talking about specific species, high value trees.
That's right. And we're going to dig into all of that in this deep dive.
Yeah.
But, before we get into the nitty-gritty, for our listeners out there, why should they even care about this? Why is this something that they should be paying attention to?
Well, if you're a homeowner in Pretoria and you have a garden, maybe you've invested time and money in landscaping, you've got some beautiful trees. Well, this could directly impact you. These trees are valuable, and there are people out there who are actively targeting them.
So it's not just about the trees themselves. It's about, potentially losing something that you've put a lot of effort into.
Exactly. It's about protecting your property, your investment, and, let's be honest, some of these trees are more than just plants. They're part of the character of a neighborhood.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into all of that. But I think it's important for our listeners to know that we're not just speculating here. We're basing this deep dive on some pretty solid information.
Oh, absolutely. We've got information from an undercover investigation. We've
Right.
looked at police reports. We've spoken to experts in horticulture and security. We've even managed to get an anonymous interview with someone who is actually involved in stealing trees.
Yeah, that was a pretty incredible interview. We'll get to that a bit later. But um, okay, so let's start with the basics. Let's talk about the trees themselves. Which trees are we talking about here? Which ones are the most sought after by these tree thieves?
Well, there seems to be a clear hierarchy. Not all trees are created equal in the eyes of these criminals, and topping the list, and this might surprise some people, are cycads.
Cycads, really. I mean, those ancient-looking plants.
Yeah, those ones, they look like they're straight out of Jurassic Park, and that's part of the appeal, especially certain species like the Encephalotos genus. They're incredibly rare. They grow incredibly slowly, and some of them are actually endangered in the wild.
So basically, they're like the rare stamps of the plant world.
Exactly, and that makes them highly valuable to collectors, and that's what drives the black market for them.
Hmm?
I mean, some of these cycads can fetch thousands, even tens of thousands of rands.
Wow. Okay, so cycads are at the top of the list. What else? What else are these thieves after?
Next up, we've got mature olive trees. And I'm emphasizing the word mature because that's the key here. These aren't saplings. We're talking about big, well-established trees that can instantly transform a landscape. Give it that kind of Mediterranean vibe.
Right, because who wants to wait decades for a tree to grow that big?
Exactly. People want instant gratification, and they're willing to pay a premium for it. So a mature olive tree that's been stolen can be sold for a much higher price than a younger one that you'd buy from a nursery.
So instant gratification is fueling tree crime. Who knew?
It's a strange world we live in. And after olive trees, we've got Japanese maples.
Oh yeah, those are beautiful.
They're known for their vibrant foliage, their graceful shape, and their manageable size, which makes them popular for smaller gardens. They're also highly sought after in the horticultural trade, so they have a good resale value, which makes them attractive to thieves.
Makes sense.
Uh,
Okay, so we've got cycads, mature olives, Japanese maples. What
Yeah.
else?
Well, then we've got aloes, and this might seem a little less obvious, but it's tied to the growing interest in medicinal plants and natural remedies.
Right. Aloes are supposed to be good for all sorts of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of belief in their healing properties,
Yeah.
and certain aloe species are particularly sought after. So that's driving up demand, and unfortunately, that's leading to more thefts from gardens.
It's interesting how something that's supposed to be, beneficial and healing is actually fueling this criminal activity.
Yeah, it's a bit ironic. And finally, rounding out our top five, we have heritage oaks.
Heritage oaks now, those are something special.
These are usually old, well-established oaks that have been around for generations. They often have sentimental value for homeowners. They might have childhood memories associated with them, or they might just be, a landmark in the neighborhood.
Right, they're part of the history of a place.
Exactly. And sadly, thieves sometimes exploit that emotional connection. They might try to sell the tree for a high price, or even worse, they might engage in a form of extortion, demanding payment from the owner for the tree's safe return.
That's just awful, preying on people's emotions like that.
It is. It's a particularly cruel aspect of this whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's our top 5, the trees that are most likely to be targeted by these thieves. But let's move on to the how. How are they actually doing this? How are they stealing these trees?
Right, because we're not talking about little saplings here. Some of these trees are huge. How are they getting them out of people's gardens without anyone noticing?
Well, this is where our undercover investigation really starts to get interesting.
Hmm.
Our team planted GPS-tracked trees in Menlo Park, which is known for its, affluent homes and beautiful gardens.
So basically, you set a trap.
We did. We wanted to see how these thieves operate, and what we learned is that they're pretty organized. They're not just randomly picking trees. They're doing their homework. They're casing properties. They're watching people's routines.
So they're not just opportunistic, they're actually planning this out.
Yeah, they're planning it, and they're looking for the right opportunity. And one thing that stood out was that there was a spike in thefts just before public holidays.
That makes sense. People are away on vacation, their houses are empty.
Exactly. It's the perfect time to strike. And another thing they do is they use vehicles that are disguised as belonging to landscaping companies.
Oh, that's clever.
It allows them to blend in. They can drive around residential areas with all their tools and equipment, and nobody thinks twice about it.
I mean, you see landscaping vans all the time.
Exactly. So it's a really effective way to avoid suspicion. And once they've got the tree, they move quickly. I mean, really quickly. Our investigation showed that stolen trees are often sold on within 72 hours.
Wow, that's fast.
It is, and they're using private WhatsApp groups to do it.
WhatsApp groups really
Yeah,
fast.
yeah. It seems like a pretty casual platform for something like this, but it makes sense. It's easy to create private groups. It's encrypted, so it's hard for law enforcement to track, and it's a quick way to connect with potential buyers.
It's amazing how technology can be used for both good and bad.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
But this whole thing, it raises the question, what's going on in the minds of these people? Why are they doing this? And to get some insight into that, we actually managed to get an anonymous interview with someone who's involved in this.
Yeah, that was a fascinating and honestly a bit disturbing conversation.
What stood out to me was the sense of entitlement. I mean, this person basically said that they target wealthier homeowners because they believe that those homeowners won't notice a missing tree or they won't care as much.
Wow.
Yeah, and they said that it's easy money. They literally said 3 minutes with a spade and burlap. That's all it takes.
3 minutes, that's it.
That's what they said, and I think that kind of sums up their attitude. It's quick, it's easy, and they don't see it as a serious crime.
It's really disheartening to hear that. But okay, so
Yeah.
we've talked about the trees, we've talked about the methods now. Let's get to the most important part. What can people do to protect themselves? How can they prevent this from happening to them?
Well, fortunately, there are some things that homeowners can do. One of the most effective methods is microchipping.
Microchipping like you do with a dog or a cat.
Exactly. It's the same concept. You implant a tiny microchip into the tree, and it contains a unique identification number. So if the tree is stolen and recovered, the microchip can be scanned and the owner can be identified.
That's a great idea. I never would have thought of that.
It's becoming more and more common, and there are companies that specialize in this, so it's definitely worth looking into. Another option is to use UV marker systems.
UV markers. What's that?
It's a special ink or dye that's invisible under normal light, but it glows under UV light. So you can apply it to your trees, and it's very durable. It won't wash off or fade, even if the tree is transplanted. So if the tree is stolen and someone tries to sell it, the UV marker can be used to identify it.
So it's like a secret code on the tree.
Exactly. It's a way to mark your property and make it harder for thieves to get away with it. And in addition to these individual measures, there are also things that communities can do to protect themselves.
Like what?
Well, we came across a really inspiring story about a neighborhood watch program in Pretoria North. They've been incredibly successful in reducing tree theft in their area. They've got a system where residents report any suspicious activity. They also share information with each other, and they work closely with the police.
So it's all about being proactive and looking out for each other.
Exactly. And it's working. They've seen a dramatic reduction in thefts since they started this program. So it shows that community action can really make a difference.
That's fantastic to hear. But okay, let's say despite all these precautions, someone does manage to steal a tree. Is there any hope of getting it back?
There is, and we've got a really interesting case study to share with you. It's the story of a 50-year-old baobab tree that was stolen from a client in Centurion. This tree was huge. I mean, it was a landmark in the neighborhood, and the owner was devastated when it was stolen.
I can imagine a 50-year-old baobab. That's not something you can just easily replace.
No, it's not, but thankfully the story has a happy ending because they were able to recover the tree. And they did it using some pretty amazing techniques. They used drone thermal scans to search for the tree.
Drone thermal scans? How does that work?
Well, basically, they flew a drone over the area and it used thermal imaging to detect heat signatures. And because a recently transplanted tree would have a different heat signature than the surrounding vegetation, they were able to pinpoint the location of the stolen baobab.
Wow, that's incredible.
It is, and they also use something called leaf vein pattern matching.
Leaf vein pattern matching.
Yeah, it's based on the idea that every tree has a unique pattern of veins in its leaves, kind of like a fingerprint. And they were able to match the leaf vein pattern of the stolen baobab to a database of known baobab trees.
So they basically found the tree's fingerprint.
Exactly. And finally, they used soil isotope analysis.
So it was
Soil isotope analysis. It's a technique that can be used to determine the origin of a plant based on the isotopic composition of the soil that it was growing in. So by analyzing the soil clinging to the roots of the stolen baobab, they were able to confirm that it had come from the owner's property.
that's amazing. It's like CSI for trees.
It's incredible how science and technology are being used to fight tree crime. And this case just goes to show that recovery is possible even when it seems like all hope is lost.
That's a great message of hope. But I imagine that these kind of investigations are probably pretty expensive.
They can be, which is why we're so excited to announce a special opportunity for our listeners in Pretoria.
Tell us more.
For the next 48 hours, we're offering free registration for the Pretoria Tree DNA database.
The Pretoria Tree DNA database, what is that?
It's a database that's being created to help track and recover stolen trees. It's based on the same kind of technology that was used to recover that baobab tree. So if you register your trees in the database and they're ever stolen, the authorities will have a much better chance of finding them.
So it's like a safety net for your trees.
Exactly. And it's completely free for the next 48 hours, so there's really no reason not to do it.
That's incredible. We'll definitely make sure to include all the information about how to register in the show notes.
Please, we want as many people as possible to take advantage of this.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground tonight. We've talked about the trees, the methods, the motivations, the preventative measures, the recovery efforts, and this incredible new DNA database. It's been a pretty eye-opening deep dive.
It has, and I think the key takeaway here is that tree theft is a real problem in Pretoria, but it's a problem that we can do something about.
Exactly. We don't have to just sit back and let these criminals get away with it.
Mm.
We can be proactive, we can protect our trees, and we can work together to make our community safer.
And we can use the tools and resources that are available to us, like the Pretoria Tree DNA database.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important message to leave our listeners with. But before we go, I just want to leave you with one final thought. If these criminals are willing to go to such lengths to steal trees, what else are they targeting? What other unexpected things are being traded on the black market? It's a bit unsettling to think about, isn't it?
It is. It really makes you wonder what else is going on beneath the surface.
It does, and I think that's a good place to leave it for tonight. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of stolen trees in Pretoria.
It's been a pleasure.
And as always, stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay safe.
And protect your trees.
Good
Good night.